A woman changing her high-heeled shoes totaled my truck. Happy Saturday, everyone, and welcome to Story Saturday, and today is going to be the final episode of this season. So for today's story, I'm going to share with you guys how a high-heeled shoe totaled my truck. So a little backstory first. This truck was a 1988 Ford Ranger that my grandfather bought brand new, and he ended up driving this truck everywhere. Now, growing up, I remember spending a lot of time in this truck when we were going to different places, whether it be in the front seat or the back seat. I absolutely love that truck, but not just because it was my favorite color. You see, when my grandfather passed away, that truck to me was like a living memory of him. I cherished that Ranger growing up, and my dad ended up using it for a few years so that it wouldn't sit and rot before I was ready to drive it. I spent that entire spring when I was on my learner's permit cleaning the truck and detailing it. I'd like to say that I made that truck look like brand new, but for me it never looked better than when my grandfather owned it. So come August of that year, I was finally able to get my license and able to drive the truck. Now, since I got my license in August, right before school began for the entire year, I wasn't really able to take that epic road trip that a lot of people like to do with their first car. So I had planned out for the week after I finished 11th grade to go on a road trip down to Rhode Island. And when that day finally came, I had to go to work that morning because one of the other managers had called out. I had my truck loaded, it was all set to go, and on my way home I decided to stop and get gas. When I was pulling out of the gas station at the next intersection, the truck was totaled. I was traveling on a main route and a minivan had come flying out from a side street, hit the truck, and actually caused me to go skidding over onto the other side of the road into the wrong way of traffic before I hit a telephone pole. When I hit the telephone pole, my seatbelt broke, my chest slammed up against the steering wheel, I hit my head on the windshield, and I cracked it. Not knowing what to do, considering this was the first time that I was really in a major accident, I attempted to back the truck up to get it onto the right side of the road. So I backed the truck up, drove it onto the other side of the road. The wheels were locked into position from how they were hit, so I ended up kind of skirting the truck over to the side of the road. So somehow I managed to get it to the other side of the road, up over the sidewalk, and I parked it on a little grassy area that was probably about 5 feet or so away from the sidewalk. Anyways, when I got out of the truck, the woman that had hit me was in the middle of the road picking up her sunglasses, her cell phone, and a couple of Gatorade bottles that must have fallen out the window when she crashed into me. She comes over to me and says I was trying to change my high-heeled shoes and I got stuck behind the brake. She didn't say I'm sorry, she didn't ask if I was okay, all she said was, "Great, I'm gonna have to have my girlfriend now pick our son up from school." Now at this point is when I flipped out. I told the lady, "Thanks for what? I just wasted $70 in gas, you just blew through an intersection and crashed into me and totaled my truck." So then I called my dad to see if he was out of work yet and if he could pick me up, and also to see if he could get a hold of the garage that is up in our area to tow the truck back from where it got into the accident so he could bring it to the driveway. Finally, a cop showed up about 15 minutes later, and apparently the driver of the van and also the cop were acquainted with each other because the second that the cop came up, they were all buddy-buddy with each other. The cop then comes over to me and says, "How fast do you think you were going?" Now, I told the cop in all honesty that I couldn't be going more than 30 miles an hour because I just pulled out of that gas station about 1,500 feet down the road before she crashed into me. At that point in time, the cop tries to tell me that the accident was my fault. He doesn't give me a how, he doesn't give me a why, he just tries to tell me that it's my fault. I told the cop straight up that she had a stop sign that she needed to stop at, and she blew through the stop sign while she was trying to change her shoes that got stuck under the brake. How in the world could this be my fault? Clearly knowing the cop was in the wrong for trying to place the blame of the accident on me, then he starts to yell at me saying that I need to get this piece of shit truck out of here. So I told the cop, would you rather that I had left the truck in the middle of the road blocking traffic or safely pulled it over to the side of the road here where it's not in anyone's way? While I was in the middle of talking to the cop, he radios in for another tow truck to come out there after I had just told him that we had a tow truck on the way. At this point in time, the cop decides to just lean on the back of my truck with his belt buckle, and he's rubbing up against the side of my truck, and I can tell he's scratching the paint. So I walked right up to the cop, tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "You can get your fat gut right off of my piece of shit truck because I don't need any more scratches in it." At this point, the cop turned around at me, and I had a little bit of fear going on. I didn't know what was going to happen. Like I said, this was like the first major accident that I had ever been into. I'd never really talked to a cop that way before, but at the same time, I really didn't think this guy was in the right talking down to me like that and also leaning up against my truck and doing all the strange things that he was doing. So before this guy could even open his mouth, we heard the beeping noise of the tow truck backing up the tow truck that I had originally had my father call in for. At the same exact time, the other tow truck that the cop had called in was actually backing up too. Now at this point in time, my back, my neck were absolutely killing me, and I had a little bump that was forming on my forehead. The cop never asked if I needed to leave the scene by an ambulance or anything like that, and I personally didn't want to leave in an ambulance because I didn't know what would happen to my truck. So I waited for the tow truck to load my vehicle onto it and then bring it back to my house before I went over to the hospital. I ended up spending about 6 hours that night in the hospital while they did a bunch of different tests to see if I had injured my neck or my back or anything like that. Everything had turned out alright. I got out of the hospital that night, and about a week and a half later when I went up to get the police report from the accident, I had to sit there and actually talk to the chief of police because there were so many discrepancies inside the report that the officer wrote. For starters, the cop was about 2 hours off on the initial time of the accident, in addition to what direction I was traveling, what direction the woman was traveling. I mean, this whole report was just garbage. Thankfully, the insurance company that I had at the time was very tedious in looking over damages and accidents and things like that, and they deemed the entire accident her fault. I had no fault whatsoever because, like I said, she was changing her shoes. She admitted to me that she was changing her high-heeled shoe to get stuck behind the brake, and then she crashed into me. Anyways, guys, that is going to do it for today's story about the time that a high-heeled shoe totaled my truck. Thank you very much for watching. If you've ever had something strange like this happen to you, let me know what it is down below in the comment section. Like I said before, this is the end of this season for Story Saturday, so I'll see you all in a couple weeks when we start with the new season. Thank you for watching. Peace.